The world of Eldoria nestled between the towering peaks of the Elden Mountains and the vast emerald expanse of the Eldenwood. The land of Eldoria stretched in all directions, a realm of ancient beauty and untamed wonder. Rivers, silver in the morning light, wove through rolling hills and dense forests, their waters whispering secrets of the past. The air was thick with the scent of blooming wildflowers and the distant echo of birdsong, a harmony that had remained undisturbed for centuries. Yet beneath this idyllic surface lay a world of mystery, where the forces of nature and the remnants of an age-old power intertwined. At the heart of Eldoria lay the Eldenstones, colossal formations of luminous crystal that pulsed with a quiet, otherworldly energy. These stones, scattered across the land, were said to be the remnants of an ancient civilization long forgotten, their power still lingering in the fabric of the world. Legends spoke of the Eldenstones as sources of wisdom, strength, and even immortality, but also as a temptation that had led many to ruin. Some believed that the stones were the last vestiges of a godlike being who had once walked the land, leaving behind this gift or curse for those who would seek it. The people of Eldoria, though scattered across the vast lands, shared a deep reverence for the Eldenstones. They were not merely objects of power, they were symbols of the land's enduring legacy, a reminder of the balance that must be maintained between the forces of nature and the ambitions of those who sought to wield them. The Eldenwood, in particular, was a place of both wonder and fear, its ancient trees whispering forgotten tales to those who dared to listen. It was said that the trees themselves were imbued with the remnants of the Eldenstones, their roots entwined with the very essence of the land. Yet, for all its beauty and mystery, Eldoria was not without its dangers. The land had known times of great strife, when the balance between the natural world and the will of men had been disrupted. Some had sought to harness the power of the Eldenstones for their own ends, only to be consumed by their own desires. The land had a way of remembering such transgressions, and the Eldenstones themselves seemed to watch, waiting for those who would once again attempt to claim their power. It was in this world, rich with both promise and peril, that the story of Eldoria would unfold, their roots entwined with the power of the Eldenstones for their own ends, only to be consumed by their own desires. The land had a way of remembering such transgressions, and the Eldenstones themselves seemed to watch, wait with both promise and peril. A world of wonder and danger, of power and corruption, where the fate of the land would rest in the hands of those who would seek the Eldenstones, and the choices they would make in the face of their temptation. The protagonist's journey. In the quiet village of Eldenbrook, nestled at the edge of the Eldenwood, lived a young man named Aelric, whose fate would be inexorably tied to the ancient power of the Eldenstones. Born to a family of humble but respected artisans, Aelric was raised among the simple rhythms of village life, where the clang of the blacksmith's hammer and the scent of freshly baked bread were as familiar as the stars above. From a young age, he displayed a keen curiosity about the world beyond his village, often wandering the forest's edge to marvel at the towering trees and the distant glow of the Eldenstones. Unlike many of his peers who viewed the stones as distant relics of a forgotten age, Aelric was drawn to their mystery, sensing in them a power that could shape the future of Eldoria itself. His journey toward the Eldenstones began in the twilight of his youth, when he first heard the tales of the ancient civilization that had once ruled the land. These stories, passed down through generations, spoke of a time when the Eldenstones had been the source of great wisdom and strength, guiding the people of Eldoria through ages of prosperity. Yet, the same legends warned of the dangers that came with such power, of those who had sought to claim it for themselves and had been consumed by their own ambition. Aelric, though young, understood the duality. Psyche of a time when the Eldenstones had been the source of great wisdom and strength, guiding the people of Eldoria through ages of prosperity. Of these tales, he saw in them both a warning and a challenge, a call to uncover the truth of the Eldenstones and to wield their power with wisdom rather than greed. As he grew older, Aelric's fascination with the Eldenstones deepened. He studied the ancient texts and maps that spoke of the stones' locations, tracing their paths across the land with an almost obsessive determination. His journey was not one of recklessness, but of purpose. He believed that the Eldenstones were not merely objects of power, but keys to a greater understanding of the world, a way to restore the balance that had been disrupted by those who had come before. Yet, even as he pursued his quest, a shadow of doubt lingered in the back of his mind. He knew that power, no matter how noble the intent, could be a double-edged sword. Despite his resolve, Aelric was not immune to the allure of the Eldenstones. The more he learned, the more he felt their pull, as if they were calling to him from the depths of the forest. He could not ignore the whispers that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, a voice that promised greatness and warned of the cost of failure. And so, with a heart full of both hope and trepidation, Aelric set forth on his journey, unaware that the path he had chosen would lead him to a destiny far greater and far darker than he could have ever imagined. The temptation of power. Aelric's journey led him deep into the heart of the Eldenwood, where the air grew thick with the scent of moss and the hush of unseen things. The more he learned, the more he felt their pull on his marrying and Twedi, a destiny far greater and far darker. The trees, ancient and towering, seemed to lean in as he passed, their gnarled branches whispering secrets of ages long past. At last, he reached the clearing where the first of the Eldenstones lay hidden beneath a veil of ivy and shadow. The stone pulsed with a quiet, otherworldly glow, as if it had been waiting for him. Aelric stepped forward, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and trepidation. He had spent years preparing for this moment, but now that he stood before the stone, he felt the weight of his choices pressing upon him. As he reached out to touch the Eldenstone, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling his mind with visions of the past, of a time when the Eldenstones had been the source of great power and wisdom, guiding the people of Eldoria through ages of prosperity. He saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the triumphs and tragedies that had shaped the world. The Eldenstones had been both a gift and a curse, a force that had elevated the greatest of men and cast the most ambitious into ruin. Elric's hands trembled as he withdrew them from the stone, his mind reeling with the knowledge that had been imparted to him. Yet with this knowledge came a temptation. The Eldenstones were not merely relics of the past, they were still alive, still waiting for those who would seek their power. Aelric felt the pull of their energy, a whisper in his mind that promised strength beyond his imagining. He could see himself standing at the pinnacle of power, guiding Eldoria into an age of enlightenment, shaping the world with his will. The thought was intoxicating, and for a moment he allowed himself to be swept away by it. But as the visions faded, a shadow of doubt crept into his thoughts. He had always believed that power should be wielded with wisdom, that the Eldenstones were meant to be used for the good of all. Yet, the very nature of power was a test, a temptation that had led many before him to ruin. He could not ignore the warnings of the past, the stories of those who had sought to claim the Eldsia for themselves and had been consumed by their own desires. The Eldenstones were not merely a source of strength, they were a mirror reflecting the true nature of those who sought to wield them. Aelric took a step back from the stone, his heart heavy with uncertainty. He had come seeking knowledge, but now he found himself standing at the precipice of a choice that would define his future. Would he succumb to the allure of power, or would he walk away, leaving the Eldenstones untouched? The answer lay within him, and the path he chose would shape the fate of Eldoria itself. The descent into corruption, Elric's decision to take the power of the Eldenstones was not made lightly. He had spent years preparing for this moment, studying the ancient texts, tracing the stones' locations, and contemplating the weight of the choice before him. Yet, when the time came, he found that the temptation of the Eldenstones was greater than he had ever anticipated. The moment his hands touched the stone, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling his mind with visions. Was not made lightly. He had spent years preparing for this moment, studying the ancient texts of untold power and the promise of a future where he could shape the world as he saw fit. At first, the power of the Eldenstones was a blessing. Aelric felt a strength he had never known before, a force that seemed to flow through his very being. He could heal the land, mend the broken, and bring prosperity to the people of Eldoria. With the Eldenstones at his command, he could end the suffering that had plagued the land for centuries, restore the balance that had been lost, and lead Eldoria into an age of enlightenment. The people saw the change in him, the way the Eldenstones seemed to respond to his will, and they looked upon him with awe and reverence. But as the days passed, Aelric began to see the subtle shifts in himself. The Eldenstones at his command, he could end the suffering that had plagued the land for centuries, restore the balance that had been lost and had plagued the Eldoria into an age of enlightenment. The power of the Eldenstones was not merely a gift, it was a force that demanded something in return. He found himself growing more distant from the people he had once cared for, his thoughts consumed by the vastness of what he could achieve. He no longer saw the world as it was, but as it could be. Perfect, unshackled from the limitations that had bound it for so long. The Eldenstones whispered to him in the dead of night, offering him visions of power beyond his imagining, of a future where he would be the master of all things. At first, Aelric resisted these temptations, telling himself that he would use the power of the Eldenstones for the good of Eldenstones, for the good of Eldoria. He would not become like those who had come before him, those who had sought to claim the stones for their own ends and had been consumed by their own desires. But the more he wielded the power, the more he found himself slipping. Small decisions, once made with care and wisdom, became more impulsive, more self-serving. He began to see those who opposed him as obstacles to be removed rather than voices to be heeded. The people who had once looked upon him with admiration now saw the change in him, the way his eyes no longer held the same warmth, the way his words carried the weight of command rather than guidance. The Eldenwood, once a place of wonder and reverence, began to change as well. The trees that had once whispered forgotten tales now seemed to shudder at his presence, their leaves turning brittle and withered. The rivers, once clear and pure, ran dark with an unnatural hue, as if the very land was recoiling from the corruption that had taken root within him. Aelric could feel it, the slow but inevitable unraveling of the balance he had once sought to restore. He tried to ignore it, to convince himself that he was still in control, that he was still the man who had set out to use the Eldenstones for the good of all. But the truth was inescapable. And so, the first signs of corruption took hold. Aelric no longer saw himself as a guardian of the Eldenstones, but as their master. The power that had once filled him with wonder now consumed him, and he found himself standing at the precipice of a choice that would define not only his fate, but the fate of Eldoria itself. The fall of the Guardian Aelric stood at the heart of the Eldenwood, his once humble form now a shadow of the man he had been. The Eldenstones pulsed around him, their luminous glow no longer a beacon of wisdom but a prison of power. He had sought to wield them for the good of Eldoria, to restore balance and bring prosperity to the land. But now, as the trees around him withered and the rivers ran dark, he realized the truth. He had become the very thing he had once feared. The Eldenwood, once a place of wonder and reverence, had turned against him. The ancient trees, whose roots had once entwined with the very essence of the land, now stood in defiance, their gnarled branches reaching toward the sky as if pleading for salvation. The air was thick with a strange, unnatural energy, a force that had once been the source of life and wisdom now twisted into something malevolent. Aelric could feel it in his bones, the weight of the corruption that had taken root within him spreading like a slow poison through the land. He had not come to Eldoria to destroy it, he had come to save it. And yet, with each passing day, the land had grown more distant from him, as if it could no longer recognize the man who had once walked among it with humility and purpose. The people of Eldoria, who had once looked upon him with admiration, now regarded him with fear. They had seen the changes in him, the way his eyes no longer held the same warmth, the way his words carried the weight of command rather than guidance. He had become a figure of power, but not of benevolence, and now, as he stood at the heart of the Eldenwood, he knew that the final test was upon him. The Eldenstones had always been a test, a mirror reflecting the true nature of those who sought to wield them. He had passed the first trials, had been tempted by the power they offered, and had allowed himself to be consumed by it. But now the final reckoning had come. A low rumble echoed through the trees, a sound that sent shivers through Aelric's spine. The ground beneath him trembled as the Eldenwood itself seemed to awaken, its ancient power stirring in response to the corruption that had taken root within him. From the depths of the forest a figure emerged, a being of light and shadow, its form shifting between the two as if it were both a guardian and a warning. The Eldenwood's guardian had come to judge him, to see if he had truly understood the nature of the power he had sought to wield. "You have taken what was never meant to be yours," the guardian's voice echoed, deep and resonant, as if it had spoken through the ages. "The Eldenstones were never meant to be controlled, only guided. You have sought to command them, and in doing so, you have brought ruin upon the land." Aelric clenched his fists, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I did not mean for this to happen," he said, his voice shaking. "I only wanted to save Eldoria, to restore what had been lost." The guardian's form flickered, its eyes glowing with an intensity that made Aelric feel as if he were being judged by the very essence of the world itself. "You sought to save Eldoria, but in doing so you have brought about its destruction. Power is not a gift, nor is it a curse. It is a test, and you have failed." Aelric felt the weight of the words settle upon him, the truth of them sinking into his very soul. He had not failed because he had been weak, but because he had been too ambitious, too consumed by the power he had sought to wield. He had allowed himself to be tempted, to believe that he could control something that was never meant to be controlled. And now there was only one choice left to him. The Eldenstones would not be his to wield, nor would they be his to destroy. They were a part of the world, a force that must be left to its own will. If he was to atone for his sins, he would have to relinquish the power he had taken, to let the Eldenstones return to their place in the world. With a final shuddering breath, Aelric stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the Eldenstones. He did not try to command them, nor did he seek to destroy them. He simply let go. The moment his fingers touched the stones, a surge of energy coursed through him, filling him with a sense of peace he had not felt in years. The Eldenstones pulsed once more, their light dimming as they returned to their natural state, no longer bound by the will of man who had sought to control them. The guardian's form faded, its voice echoing one final time in Elric's mind. "The land will heal, but the scars of your choice will remain. May you carry them with wisdom, and may Eldoria find its way once more." The reckoning and the rebirth. As the last of the Eldenstone's light faded, a profound stillness settled over the Eldenwood. The once withered trees, their leaves brittle and withered, began to shift, their branches trembling as if awakening from a long slumber. The air, thick with the weight of corruption, grew lighter, the oppressive energy that had clung to the land dissipating like mist in the morning sun. Aelric stood at the heart of the forest, his body weary, his soul burdened by the choices he had made. The once withered trees, their leaves brittle and withered, began to shift, their branches trembling as if awakening from a long slumber. "The air thick with the land," The power of the Eldenstones for the good of Eldoria, yet in doing so he had nearly brought about its ruin. Now, as the stones returned to their natural state, he felt the weight of his failure pressing upon him, a lesson that would not be forgotten. The land, though scarred, had not been destroyed. The rivers, once dark with the taint of corruption, began to clear, their waters running pure once more. The trees, though still bearing the marks of Aelric's fall, began to heal, their roots entwining with the very essence of the land, as if seeking to restore the balance that had been disrupted. As if seeking to restore the balance that had been disrupted. It was a slow process, one that would take time, but the Eldenwood had not been lost. It had endured, and in its endurance it had found a way to reclaim itself. The people of Eldoria, who had once looked upon Aelric with admiration, now regarded him with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. They had seen the transformation in him, the way he had once stood as a beacon of hope and had fallen into the depths of ambition. Some had feared him, believing that the power of the Eldenstones had consumed him entirely. Others had wept for him, mourning the man he had once been. But now, as the land began to heal, they saw that the power of the Eldenstones was not a force to be wielded, but a force to be respected. Aelric, though exiled from the village of Eldenbrook, did not vanish into the shadows. He had made a choice, and though it had come at a great cost, it was a choice that would, milding the mixture of sorrow and understanding, shape the future of Eldoria. He wandered the land, not as a ruler, but as a man who had learned the weight of power and the cost of ambition. He spoke to the people, not as a god or a savior, but as a man who had once sought to control the very forces of nature and had been humbled by them. His words carried the wisdom of his journey, a lesson that would be passed down through generations. The Eldenstones, though no longer bound by Aelric's will, still remained as a testament to the power that had once been. They were not to be worshipped, nor were they to be feared. They were a part of the world, a force that would always exist, waiting for those who would seek to understand them rather than to command them. The people of Eldoria would no longer seek to wield the power of the Eldenstones for their own ends, but would instead look upon them as a reminder of the balance that must be maintained between power and wisdom. And so, Eldoria found its way once more. The land, though scarred, had not been lost. The people, though shaken, had not been broken. And Aelric, though forever changed, had found a path that would allow him to live with the choices he had made, not as a ruler, but as a man who had learned the true nature of power. The Eldenwood would never be the same, but neither would it be forgotten. It had endured, and in its endurance it had found a way to heal. The story of Aelric and the Eldenstones would be told for generations to come, a tale of power and corruption, of ambition and humility. It would serve as a warning, a lesson that would be passed down through the ages, reminding those who would come after of the cost of unchecked desire and the importance of wisdom in the face of power. And as the sun rose over the Eldenwood, casting its golden light upon the land, it was clear that Eldoria had not been lost to the corruption of power. It had endured, and in its endurance, it had found a way to begin again. The legacy of power and the lessons of Eldoria. The legacy of power and the lessons of Eldoria. The tale of Aelric and the Eldenstones would echo through the ages, a cautionary legend that would be passed from one generation to the next. It was not merely a story of power and corruption, but of the choices that define a man and the consequences that follow. In the end, Aelric had not been destroyed by the Eldenstones, nor had he been consumed by them. He had been tested, and in the crucible of his own ambition, he had found the truth that power is not a gift to be claimed, but a force that must be understood and wielded with wisdom. The Eldenstones had not been the source of his downfall, but the mirror that had revealed the depths of his own soul. The land of Eldoria had not been lost, but had endured, and in its endurance it had found a way to heal. The people who had once looked upon Aelric with awe and reverence now saw him as a man who had walked the path of temptation and had emerged with the understanding that power, no matter how great, must be tempered by humility. The Eldenwood, though scarred by the corruption that had taken root, had not been destroyed. It had withstood the trials that had come upon it, and in its resilience it had found a way to reclaim itself. The rivers had run clear once more, the trees had stood tall, and the land had found its way back to the balance that had once been. Yet, the lessons of Eldoria would not be forgotten. The story of Aelric would serve as a reminder that power is not an end in itself, but a test of character. It is not the strength of the Eldenstones that defines a man, but the choices he makes in the face of temptation. fall of the guardian who had once sought to command the forces of the world, and they would carry the wisdom of his journey with them. They would understand that power is not a force to be wielded without consequence, that it is not a gift to be claimed without cost, but a burden that must be carried with care. And so, the legacy of Eldoria would endure, not in the hands of those who would seek to claim the power of the Eldenstones for themselves, but in the hearts of those who would remember the lessons of the past. The Eldenstones would remain not as a source of corruption, but as a symbol of the balance that must be maintained between the will of man and the forces of the world. The land would continue to whisper its ancient tales, and the people would listen, knowing that the path of power is one that must be walked with wisdom, with humility, and with the understanding that the greatest strength is not in the power one wields, but in the choices one makes. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Hit the notification bell to be notified of new stories when they become available. Feel free to leave a comment and tell me if you enjoyed the story and want to hear more like it.